Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
A new escalation tonight in the battle over House Dems' demands for more evidence from 81 Trump associates, ranging from the president's top aides and children to Mueller witnesses like Michael Caputo, a former Trump advisor who's lobbied for a foreign power on behalf of Russian energy conglomerates and who's done a hat trick, talking with Mueller's team and addressing both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. He's never been accused of misleading investigators, and tonight Caputo's saying, why isn't all that enough? He suggests that Chairman Nadler review his past transcripts before these committees and move on. Now, some outlets have reported that means Caputo won't cooperate with the Democrats. Caputo says it's not the whole story, and he's claiming his own past cooperation. I am joined now by former Trump campaign aide Michael Caputo. I should mention, of course, it's Ash Wednesday, and former Watergate special prosecutor Nick Ackerman. Good evening to both of you.
Hi, how you doing, Art?
Good evening.
Michael, let me ask the question that the House Dems are asking, a lot of people around the country are asking. Why not go back in, tell the truth, and move forward?
First of all, I want to correct you. I've never lobbied Congress, certainly not for a foreign power, so I don't know where you get that. I've heard it before. It's patently false.
Well, we've had you on before. I didn't
Right, I didn't catch it the last time. Yeah, I didn't catch it the last time.
You and I have spoken about it. You lobbied on behalf of Russian interests. Give us the best precision language.
I didn't lobby. I didn't lobby.
You advocated for Russian interests?
I did a press conference for Gazprom Media. I didn't lobby for Russian government or lobby any government or any foreign power in this country. I've never done it.
You're saying you didn't, right? I don't mean to mislead. That when you and I talked on the phone, you mentioned, well, you know, it makes sense they'd want to talk to you because you'd worked. You said for folks tied to the Kremlin. I mean, that's what I'm referring to.
No, I said I advised the Kremlin. I lived there for 7 years.
Yeah.
I was sent there by the Clinton administration to meddle in Russian elections. I've never lobbied the American government on behalf of the Russian government.
Not a registered lobbyist, but there's not a debate about the fact that you did a lot of stuff back then.
No doubt, no doubt. And I can understand why they wanted to talk to me. That's why they've interviewed me 3 different times now.
Well, let me get to the point here that you make a point that I think a lot of people could think sounds reasonable. You're saying you've talked to the House already. Why do you have to talk again? Explain.
Right. Well, first of all, when I was invited to speak to the House Intelligence Committee two years ago, coming up soon, I asked to be able to do that in public. And when they refused to let me do it in public, I agreed to do it anyway, voluntarily. And I asked them to release my testimony to the public. They refused to do that as well. The same thing went down with the Senate Intelligence Committee. And, of course, the Mueller team, they do all of that in private. But eventually, at some point in time, they're going to have to stop asking me to testify. This would be the 4th time I'm asked the same questions all over again. And from my perspective, it's a perjury trap. They're trying
before we get to perjury trap house, as some call it. I'm going to bring in Nick. One more thing for you on this, to be clear for the record, because all this matters to a lot of people. Right. Let me read from what they're asking you about. They're asking you about the June Trump Tower meeting, the contacts here with the Russian Federation and Trump associates, contacts from January 2016 with Manafort, Gates, Kalimnik, who of course is a big deal, and other figures. Is your contention tonight that you have addressed all of that already?
Yes, my attorney, the former New York Attorney General, responded to that within 24 hours and told them I have none of the documents they're asking for.
Let me bring in Nick. What do you think of these arguments?
Well, I think my real question, Mr. Caputo, is, as I understand it, in May of 2016, which is a critical date, it's a month before the Trump Tower meeting on June 9th. It's right after the documents are stolen from the Democratic National Committee. You're approached by some Russian national who basically offers to provide information to you about Hillary Clinton in return for $2 million. I mean, have you been questioned at all by any of the committees on that issue?
I was questioned by the Mueller investigation about it, and I supplemented my testimony to the House and the Senate on that. And that entire episode, according to my attorney, who is former U.S. Attorney, former New York Attorney General Dennis Bacco, that whole exchange with a Russian national who was working for the FBI and offering information not from the Russian government, but from a Ukrainian national who worked for the Clinton Foundation, was not responsive to the request. If you read my request,
what evidence do you have that this person was working for the FBI? I mean, real evidence.
Yeah, I mean, are you new to this thing? Really? I mean,
I'm asking you what evidence.
I can tell you, I've told everybody, nobody seems to be interested in it. Go to DemocratDossier.com. The guy, I have a 17-year history with this guy working for the FBI. He signed an affidavit in federal.
What evidence
hold
do you
on,
have?
let me honest. Let me answer this. In U.S. federal court, he signed an affidavit saying he worked for 17 years as an FBI informant. I also have copies of 9 of his FBI informant visas, S-type visas, and he still sits in America today. It's not a question as to whether or not this guy was an FBI informant.
Well, and Michael, what's
interesting,
interesting
is whether he was the day he decided to have lunch.
What's interesting here also is, you know, in fairness, you've provided all those answers to Mueller, and I want to be clear with viewers. You know, some people might not like that you chose to support Donald Trump, but you did. In fairness, Mueller hasn't, to your knowledge, to our knowledge, reported-wise, found anything wrong with that contact. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So when you told them your answer to that, what was your sense of how they viewed that meeting?
I think they viewed it as something they already knew about, and they were rather disappointed that I told them about it. I thought at the time that it looked like a perjury trap in and of itself, but I was fully honest to the Mueller team, and when we left that day, they said there was no need to talk to me again, and they never called me before the grand jury. The
last thing I want to ask you about, again, because we like to go to people who are directly involved in this, it's important, is you were saying here, I'm reading from what you're telling the committee, quote, you're not in possession of any documents relating to any contacts, 2015 to 2017, involving Russian Federation officials, agents, intermediaries, and Roger Stone. Now, as you know, there were people like Roger Stone who were ultimately indicted in part on saying no documents. I mean, that was the claim that Mueller got him on. You're certain on this? You stand by this?
No doubt. Roger Stone never discussed WikiLeaks, DC Leaks, or any of the other organizations he's accused of talking to. Never discussed those with me. I didn't know anything about it until I read about it in the media at all. So I'm completely in the clear on this. I have no legal exposure.
And Nick, a final thought. I'm going to move you on from, and I know you like to cross-examine. I'm going to move you on from that. A final thought. When you see what's happening here and this playing out, is this the best way for the House Dems to pick up, or do they risk doing a bit of a retread? Which, again, whatever one thinks of some of these officials, there is the argument here, and that's why we want to hear it, that they say, look, I've already given you that.
Well, I think that's right, but I think he just also, Mr. Caputo, admitted that he was not questioned by any of the committees about this incident in May of 2016. It may have been supplemented by an attorney, but the fact is they have the right to question him about that. If you're on one of these committees, even if you're in a prosecutor's office, you're going to look at what the prior testimony is. You're going to look at what hasn't been asked. And I don't know why they would waste their time going over the same material unless there's something new that they want to show them about that same material. So I think, his complaint is well taken, but the question is, has he really provided everything that they're interested in?
Michael, can we end on a high note? Did you hear that? Nick Ackerman said that something you said was well taken. Well, I know you guys disagree about a lot of this, and Nick, you think there might be further indictments.
Absolutely.
And I bet, Michael, you may not.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
We don't know.
I don't think the Mueller investigations, I think they're on their way to the end of the road. The question is what happens with the House Judiciary Committee. And, listen, they told my attorney they would like me to come in, or asked if I would come in. My attorney said, you got to be nuts. Why would he come and testify again? Here's the thing, though. As probably one of the most marginal characters in that list of 81 people, if they're looking for me to come in, they're looking for all 81 to come in. It's going to be a long year.
Well, I was ending on the high note of you guys agreeing on a little something. You're not marginal. You're a guy who worked for Trump and had contacts in Russia, and as we've said, is not accused of wrongdoing. That's not marginal, though. That's in the heart of what a lot of people are probing. I want to give a special thanks to both of you. There aren't enough conversations, in my humble opinion, like this, on the facts, in these open cases. Nick Ackerman and Michael Caputo, thanks to both of you.
It is Thursday, the 7th of March of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Many people, I should mention, have come to other platforms where I post and expecting to actually see recipes. So I guess I'm going to have to start doing that. Now, I don't know. Do I cull recipes from a book that I put together when I was working in San Francisco way back? I mean, that's kind of old style vintage cooking now. Well, maybe I will start doing that. And since people are actually coming to get recipes, because we are West Coast Cookbook, and in the virtual aspect of this salon, there are cookbooks in the shelves. I have bookcases and type shelves around here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. So I suppose if I'm going to carry on that meme, I should. Well, I will. Hey, looks like Manafort is looking at about 24 years that he will be pardoned for. Because Trump is a mobster, and obstruction of justice is what they do as part of their job. So he's just doing a job. Some people do it better than others. I don't know. I think he's fairly middling. But we're going to talk about more of Trump's obstruction of everything. Hey, what about that infrastructure bill? Boy, bridges are being built, and oh no, I guess not. They're falling down. Darn it. Well, that was Nick Ackerman. He's a former Watergate prosecutor, and he grilled Michael Caputo on Ari Melber's show, The Beat. And because Caputo's pushing back on, why do I have to testify again? I've testified too much. I don't know. Just because I lived in Russia for 7 years and carried on with all sorts of mobsters over there, why do they want to talk to me? This guy. And he's whining, I have a family. Well, you know what? A lot of people have families. All right. Pretty much 3 million more that voted for Hillary than voted for Trump. Okay, what about those families, pal? Okay, well, the Russian trolls and bots are out in force. And it's fun. I don't really get hammered like I used to. Way back during Malheur, that's when I noticed a change. Malheur was when the Bundy clan took over the park reserve up in the Cascades east of me. And I noticed an uptick of weirdness. And I know now, trolls and bots, I pretty much in shorthand call them Russian trolls and bots. But it's just a generic term. Because it could also be like a 400-pound guy sitting on a sofa in Roseburg, Oregon, okay, who's also influenced by Russian trolls and bots. So that's how that works. And I think in the beginning, you engage, but don't ever feed the trolls. It didn't take me long to remember that one. And I came up with some, shall we say, word plays. in which I can expose trolls and bots. Bots in particular. Trolls, since they're sometimes real people, they're a little bit more difficult, or there's a different way of breaking down their brain to expose who they really are. But because they're brainwashed, you can still cause them dissonance by a bit of wordplay. And I think that because I've done the wordplay, and it doesn't take much now, they don't come after me. I don't know why. I don't know what I've done to deserve this. Don't ignore me. Come on. All right. Well, what's on the rest of the menu? Of course, Caputo and Ackerman going at it at the top. And here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, we're going to look at leaked chats that reveal white nationalist group Identity Evropa and their efforts to cozy up to the GOP. Okay. Maybe the GOP sent in a letter first. I don't know. We've got the letter from Identity Evropa to the GOP. Mitch McConnell is blocking the bill that would make it easier for Americans to vote. And he said, well, and people asked him why. And he said, because I decide. And Trump just made sure you won't hear about how many civilians are killed in U.S. drone strikes, because then you'd be mad. Can't have that. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where the Trump administration is already obstructing 30 congressional investigations. And Democrats in Congress unveiled legislation to reinstate net neutrality rules. Don't throttle me, bro. Don't throttle me. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the page is the contribute button. If you could please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. We are in dire need of equipment ourselves. I know David's got his equipment issues, which is funny because his machines have been running about as long as ours have. Really? So think of that. A lot of work being put out of them. And to keep this powerhouse of Resistance Radio resisting as the founders originally intended. So thank you for your recurring patronage. And for those of you who are considering maybe buying us a cup of coffee a month, would be a nice thing to do. And we would think it would be very nice as well. So thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, look us up at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. I take care of at Justice Putnam on Twitter, and I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and I get the links for that up on social media pretty quick, so bear with me, folks. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeart, YouTube, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. All right, Luke Barnes of Think Progress brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, by the way, because we may have the Metro Shrimp and Grits special for Thursdays, but the French 77, though it is featured on Friday, it is available for your virtual pleasure every day of the week, even when we're not open, because we're virtual. You can do anything that way. All right. Well, ever since the violent Unite the Right rally, where there were some very fine people on both sides, by the way, that rocked Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, the far right has been on the defensive. White supremacists like Richard Spencer have been kicked off web pages and fundraising sites, while others, such as the crying Nazi Chris Cantwell, have infuriated their followers by cooperating with law enforcement. Anti-fascists continue to regularly dox members of groups like the Proud Boys, which makes any sort of overt far-right organizing an increasingly fraught endeavor. I should say that here in Oregon, the Republican Party, the GOP political party in the state, hires the Proud Boys as security. Just giving you a little bit of idea of where the GOP is on this issue. One group, however, responded to the increased scrutiny by hiding its overt far-right sympathies and attempting to rebrand itself as a GOP-friendly organization, actively encouraging its members to join local chapters of the Republican Party. Isn't that interesting? Identity Evropa's leadership strongly encourages our members to get involved in local politics. The group's leader, Patrick Casey, wrote in a November 2017 message obtained by the autonomous media collective Unicorn Riot. The GOP is essentially the white man's party at this point, so it makes far more sense for us to subvert it than to create our own party. Well, the thing about the GOP is you don't really have to subvert it very much. They've been racist since way before Atwater came up with coded terms. Identity Evropa purports to be a group of European Americans seeking to restore America by protesting against globalization and mass immigration. The group was formed in 2016 by Nathan D'Amigo, a former Marine, who experienced a racial awakening after reading David Duke's autobiography in prison. Oh, this guy's got his own My Struggle going on, doesn't he? Well, since then, the group has been active in the far-right sphere, helping to plan the Unite the Right rally, where there were some very fine people on both sides now, and regularly launched flyering campaigns with slogans like Protect Your Heritage and Serve Your People. The Southern Poverty Law Center has designated Identity Evropa as a hate group. Well, that's pretty easy to figure out. Now, however, newly leaked chat logs obtained by Unicorn Riot reveal that Casey doesn't want to just present a clean-cut version of Identity Evropa to the world. He actively wants its members to get involved with the Republican Party. If we're going to win this, it's going to take time, effort, and sacrifice, Casey told fellow members. If you are unable to do activism for various reasons, I'd like to encourage you to join your local Republican Party. Present as a Trump supporter nationalist. No need to broadcast your radical views. White Trump supporters, civic nationalists are fertile ground for recruiting, Casey said in an October 2017 message. They are our main targets. They just need a push. So it's prudent for us to remain active within their spheres. I'm just a little confused. I can't figure out who's infiltrating who here. Identity Evropa? Infiltrating the GOP? Usually when you infiltrate something, it's when you infiltrate something that might be a little bit against you. And I don't see where the Republican Party is against any of this. So we've already had the Proud Boys. You know, they like to go around in their khakis and their polo shirts. And now you've got Identity Evropa. And instead of wearing their black or brown shirts, they're just going to be another group of dapper Nazis. This next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays is by the great Oliver Willis. Now, as I've been put in the bubble here, it may be that rather than McConnell blocking the bill is going to make it easier for Americans to vote, he's already blocked it. And that bill is known as For the People Act, also known as House Resolution 1, or even more affectionately known as H.R. 1, which would ensure the right to vote is protected for millions of Americans. H.R. 1 would fight corruption and expand the right to vote. It would put federal guidelines and regulation in place that protect elections from foreign attackers, while also phasing out partisan gerrymandering designed to consolidate power. Polling has shown that its provisions are extremely popular, while the status quo supported by McConnell is not, and that's fighting words to Mitch. They don't call him the turtle for nothing. He's got a shell harder than snot. And what's harder than snot? Everything. But Mitch McConnell is even more adept at it. He's just going to hunker down. These are fighting words to Mitch McConnell. Well, McConnell still opted to attack the popular legislation in a floor speech, making a disingenuous attack against the bill as he promised to suppress it. He said the bill was running roughshod over states' and communities' control of elections, regulating and chilling the American people's exercise of the First Amendment, forcing taxpayers to indirectly donate to the politicians they don't like, and a dozen other bad ideas to boot. McConnell previously whined that the bill was unfair to Republicans. Well, of course, socialists like it now, don't they? Since he began coming out against the bill, McConnell's own hometown newspaper, the Lexington Herald-Leader, slammed him for his segregationist stance against the legislation's voter protection provisions. McConnell's opposition to the bill stands in stark contrast to other legislation he has pushed for votes on. McConnell is pushing for a show vote on the Green New Deal, mocking serious concerns about the damage brought about by climate change. He hopes to wield votes on the legislation as a political weapon against Democrats. Oh, look, they think the rain's going to kill us. Because he's a desert turtle, not a sea turtle. McConnell also sought a vote on needless anti-choice legislation based on harmful conservative lies about abortion practices. Yeah, full-term abortion. What? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. But it tickles the lizard brain part of these people, clearly. McConnell clearly thinks that if more people can get to the polling place and exercise their rights, that his party will suffer, and he'd be right. So he's blocking the bill in the Senate because he knows suppressing voters will empower him and his allies. In the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes out of Think Progress by Elam Katami. Well, you know, if you measure it, as they say in quantum mechanics, quantum physics, if you measure it, it will exist. And so one way to prevent, the lying liars from lying about the truth is to never, measure the truth. Exactly. After failing to meet a deadline to report data on the number of civilians and enemy combatants killed by U.S. drone strikes outside of war zones, Donald Trump on Wednesday officially rescinded the requirement that U.S. intelligence officials publicly report that information. Trump formally ended the reporting obligation by executive order because he's the king. I mean, just ask the people at Mar-a-Lago who write him, "Dear King." I bet he got this idea from his subjects at Mar-a-Lago. Well, the executive order stated that an unclassified summary of the number of strikes undertaken by the United States government against terrorist targets outside areas of active hostilities, as well as assessments of combatant and non-combatant deaths resulting from those strikes, was no longer required. Why would he do that? Not only because he wants to fudge, but the black guy instituted the requirement to begin with. Yes, it's an Obama-era requirement aimed at increasing transparency in an effort to limit the number of civilian deaths. But look, if you limit the number of civilian deaths, that's more asylum refugees at your door. Look, kill him there so that we don't have to lock him up and icebox baby gulags here. It only makes sense. Yeah, if you're in a basket with a bunch of other deplorables. Let's get to our break now, okay? And when we come back from that break, we're not only going to have weather from around the world, we're going to finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, the familiar, a little spoilage, and only a little bit of The Rock, but it all works out in the end. Ready? So which is more important, plot or character? Having asked, let's look at Fighting With My Family, the latest film by co-creator of The Office, writer-director Stephen Merchant. Fighting With My Family is a biopic about professional wrestler Paige, depicting how she went from being Sarara Knight, wrestling with her family in Norwich, England, to the WWE auditions, to their boot camp in Miami, and finally to a shot at the WWE Diva title. Considering that this movie is mostly the Knights of Norwich, it's interesting to note that this very English film is a very American movie. In fact, it's two American movies, and you've seen them both before. First, it's the underdog against the odds sports movie. You know it. Underdog is scrappy, doing things in their quirky underdog way. But surprise, underdog makes it into the championship competing against the popular show dogs on the way to the big game. Underdog struggles with their shaky skills and self-doubt until they lose faith in themselves, and right as the underdog is about to give up, Coach gives the talk saying underdog can't be anybody but themselves, and that's all they need. Inspired, the underdog makes it through the championships, plays the big game, and usually wins. All of that. Fighting With My Family is all of that. It is also a family is more important than anything else movie, because Coach here is Sarah is essential to her psyche older brother Zach, who pulls away from her because she made the WWE and he didn't. You know what? It's also a coming of age, coming into yourself story. Oh, it's also the plucky immigrant story. So it's 4 movies you've seen. But here's the thing. Even though I noticed the formulas and could see what was coming, at the end I was still on the edge of my seat. Because you know what makes a plot formula work? Character. Pugh's Knight in Fighting With My Family wins you over. She's tough enough for you to think she might win, but vulnerable enough that you fear that she'll lose, and you like her. You want her to win the match and win back her family, and it makes the film. Plus, you get a little bit of The Rock. Told ya. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Every spring, migratory birds flood back to where they breed, and that migratory behavior is accompanied by some human behavior.
In English language Wikipedia, the page views for migratory species like the indigo bunting or the Baltimore oriole tend to peak in the spring when those birds arrive in the United States on their breeding grounds.
John Mittermeier, a conservation biologist at the University of Oxford in England.
It's this incredible thing where you can see in people's online behavior and how they're using Wikipedia, you can actually see the fingerprints, if you want to say, of the arrival of the birds.
And not just birds. Mittermeier and his team surveyed nearly 2.5 billion Wikipedia page views for 32,000 species across 245 languages. And they also saw variable search rates for insects, ferns, horsetails, and flowering plants. And the online searches for birds, at least, seem to correlate with real-world data on migration times. The researchers also found that Lithuanian Wikipedia pages, for example, had more seasonality than pages in Thai or Tamil, probably because seasonal differences increase with latitude. The finding is in the journal PLOS Biology. Mittermeier says search data like this could someday be useful to conservation biologists.
In areas that are hard for biologists to survey or to reach, maybe we could be using online data like Wikipedia data to detect migration patterns or flowering seasons or things like that.
He was also encouraged by the search results.
I think there's a concern amongst conservationists that people are losing touch with the outside world and that they're not interacting with native species that much anymore. And so in that context, to see that, actually people's Wikipedia behavior is often strongly corresponding to these phenological patterns in nature was really exciting and quite unexpected for me.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
In prisons and jails, who ends up in solitary confinement? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. At a recent public hearing before the Massachusetts legislature about solitary confinement, a former inmate explained, quote, "If you have a disagreement with a correctional officer and they don't like you, you're going to the hole. They tell you to do something and you don't do it fast enough. You're going to the hole. They come to do the count and you don't stand up quick enough. Later that night, they come to your cell, and you're going to the hole." The hole is solitary confinement. It's an apt description. Last year, the Massachusetts legislature passed a law to restrict and reduce the use of solitary confinement in Massachusetts prisons and jails. But as that recent hearing demonstrates, the Department of Correction has found ways to skirt the law, including locking up a person in a cage for 21 or 22 instead of 23 hours a day and calling that confinement something else. As Jesse White, an attorney with Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, said, quote, "The Department of Corrections intends to bring itself into technical compliance with the letter of the law while subverting the intention of the law and continuing to rely on solitary confinement as a linchpin of management practices." The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1932, forever remembered as a tragic day. The nation was in the grip of the Great Depression. As the economy languished, car sales plummeted by 80%. Thousands in Detroit found themselves out of work. Bread lines in the city grew longer with each passing day. The city's Unemployed Council and the United Auto Workers came together to discuss a response to the crisis. They decided to organize a march to the Ford River Rouge plant. At that time, Henry Ford was one of the wealthiest people in the world. The crowd of as many as 5,000 workers assembled at the city's edge. They had with them a list of 14 demands, including a return to work, the right to unionize, and an end to discrimination in hiring. As the marchers reached the Dearborn, Michigan auto plant site, they were greeted with tear gas shot by police and company security forces. Some of the workers responded by throwing dirt clods and rocks. The police retreated, then regrouped to aim fire hoses at the demonstrators. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire filled the air, and in a hail of bullets, 4 marchers fell dead. A 5th later died from his wounds. The Ford March had turned into a bloody massacre. More than 60,000 marched in the funeral procession for the slain workers who lie in solidarity, buried together. The 5th, Curtis Williams, an African-American, was refused burial in the city's segregated cemetery. The workers hired an airplane and spread his ashes over the Ford plant. The sacrifice of these men have not been forgotten. Over the next decade, the auto industry became one of the strongholds of U.S. labor organizing, helping to raise the living standards of all workers. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen testified Wednesday before the House Homeland Security Committee. It was a contentious hearing dealing with Trump's national emergency declaration, barriers, asylum laws, and the separation of migrant children from their parents, and cages.
We still using cages for children?
Sir, we don't use cages for children. In the border facilities that you've been to, they were not made to detain children. As the children are processed through, they are in subparts of those facilities.
Madam Secretary?
Yes, I'm being as clear as I can, sir. Respectfully, I'm trying to answer your question.
Yes or no, are we still putting children in cages?
To my knowledge, CBP never purposely put a child in a cage if you mean a cage like this.
Purposely or whatever. Are we putting children in cages as of today?
What does a chain link fence enclosed into a chamber on a concrete floor represent to you? Is that a cage?
It's a detention space, ma'am, that you know has existed for decades.
Does it differ from the cages you put your dogs in when you let them stay outside?
Yes.
In what sense?
It's larger. It has facilities. It provides room to sit, to stand, to lay down.
So did my dog's cage.
You said that you waited to give direction on how to implement the zero-tolerance policy because you wanted to do it with compassion. Do you know how outrageous that sounds? You wanted to separate children and families, and you wanted to do it with compassion. So in the meantime, you didn't do anything at all, and you let kids be separated without tracking them. Do you know how outrageous that is, Madam Secretary? You have no feeling, no compassion, no empathy here.
Meanwhile, over in the Senate, Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley and Ranking Democrat Dianne Feinstein sent a letter to the administration seeking an investigation of public allegations of sexual abuse of minor migrants held in the custody of the Department of Health and Human Services. At the same time, during a Senate Armed Services Subcommittee hearing about sexual assault in the military, freshman Senator Martha McSally of Arizona testified that she was raped by a military superior while serving in the Air Force.
Like you, I am also a military sexual assault survivor. But unlike so many brave survivors, I didn't report being sexually assaulted. Like so many women and men, I didn't trust the system at the time. I blamed myself. I was ashamed and confused, and I thought I was strong, but felt powerless. The perpetrators abused their position of power in profound ways. And in one case, I was preyed upon and then raped by a superior officer. I stayed silent for many years, but later in my career, as the military grappled with scandals and their wholly inadequate responses, I felt the need to let some people know I, too, was a survivor. I was horrified at how my attempt to share generally my experiences were handled.
Retired astronaut Mark Kelly, the husband of former Representative Gabby Giffords, last month launched a campaign as a Democrat to defeat McSally. Michael Cohen was back before the House Intelligence Committee on Wednesday, where he reportedly gave lawmakers documents that show edits to the false written statements he made to Congress in 2017 about talks on a proposed Trump Tower in Moscow. NBC News has more.
According to a source familiar with the matter, Cohen giving lawmakers new documents aimed at backing up his explosive claim last week that the president's lawyers made changes to his previous testimony about that scrapped Trump Tower project in Moscow.
There were changes made, additions, Jay Sekulow for one. There were several changes that were made, including how we were going to handle that message. The message, of course, being the length of time that the Trump Tower Moscow project stayed and remained alive.
NBC News has not reviewed the alleged documents. Cohen has pleaded guilty to tax and financial crimes and lying to Congress, and Republicans have attacked Cohen's credibility. Tonight, the president's attorney, Jay Sekulow, firing back, saying testimony by Michael Cohen that attorneys for the president edited or changed his statement to Congress to alter the duration of the Trump Tower Moscow negotiations is completely false. And tonight, the White House is pointing us back to its previous comment on Cohen's testimony, saying it is, quote, laughable that anyone would take a convicted liar like Cohen at his word.
That, of course, coming from the administration of Donald Trump, who the Washington Post reports is now closing in on 10,000 false or misleading claims since taking office. New numbers are out from the Commerce Department that show, despite more than 2 years of Donald Trump's America First policies, the United States last year posted an $891.2 billion merchandise trade deficit, the largest in the nation's 243-year history. A broader measure of the nation's trade performance, which includes the services sector, showed a $621 billion deficit. That reflects a deterioration of more than $100 billion from the figure Trump inherited from President Barack Obama. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. The monthly U.S. trade deficit ballooned to a record $59.8 billion in December, according to new data released on Wednesday. Christine McDaniel of the Mercatus Center at George Mason University says the trade deficit shouldn't come as a surprise.
History shows that in times of U.S. economic growth, we tend to run higher deficits just because U.S. consumers and businesses import a lot of their consumption.
McDaniel served on President George W. Bush's Council of Economic Advisors and says she often needed to convince White House officials not to see the trade deficit as the sole measure of good trade policy. But Trump's obsession with the trade deficit is another story. He's latched onto the deficit itself as a root cause of economic problems, and by doing so, McDaniel says, opened himself up to criticism for something not fully under his control.
He kind of brought all this on himself. One reason I think we're all so focused on the trade numbers is because of President Trump's focus on the trade numbers. The trade deficit is grossly misunderstood. If President Trump really is focused on economic growth, he should be welcoming these big trade deficits.
But at the end of the day, the U.S. does need to keep growing its exports. Thomas Duesterberg, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, says in the long run that means continuing to sell American technology to China.
It is not easy to break into that market. They steal our technology, they subsidize their own industry, and it's just in general a hard place to sell into.
Removing those barriers to the Chinese market is a top goal of Trump's trade agenda, and Duesterberg thinks the new deficit figures will recommit U.S. negotiators to driving a hard bargain with Beijing.
We need to better protect intellectual property and better open the Chinese market to competition from our producers, or otherwise we're going to lose the high technology products which are the backbone of growth in the United States.
Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, because Hawaii is even further west than we are. Yeah, but I'm not there, so we're here. And it is currently 32 degrees. It even feels like 32 degrees. We are forecast to be a bit cooler today. We are expected to not get much higher than 47 to 48 degrees, and that could be true. Winds are currently gusting at a pretty good clip at 1 mile per hour out of the east-southeast, and will remain light and variable throughout the day and into the night, and then will shift out of the west-southwest tomorrow, bringing with it just a smidgen of more percentage of a chance of rain. Not much. We're expecting actually a bit of a drying out period until next week, Monday late, Tuesday early. Expected to have another bit of rain, and later on the midweek, maybe even a mix of rain and snow. Because I guess we're still having wintry conditions. I don't know when. I'm just preparing the planting beds now, so I don't know when I'm actually putting stuff in. Can't have frost or snow. That's what it says on everything that I've read. So there you go. Pollen is rated at none. The air quality index is in the good range at 23 parts per million. Not so good for people with breathing problems. And the daytime UV index is in the moderate range, so take care. And that's at 4. Barometric pressure is, well, it looks like it's falling. It was holding steady just a moment ago. Falling at 29.82 inches, visibility is down to 3 miles, and relative humidity is at 94%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 51 and mostly cloudy with some wind. Paris is 54 and partly cloudy. Rome is 63 and sunny. Kiev is 46 and fair. Kabul is 38 and fair. Hong Kong, 58 with rain. Tokyo is 42 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 68 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 48 and cloudy. And New York is 27 degrees, crisp, with a bright sun shining upon the canyons of the Big Apple. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. And these people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Dan Desai Martin of Shareblue Media brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. The Trump administration is refusing to cooperate with at least 30 separate investigations, according to a Politico report published yesterday, Wednesday. Democrats are conducting vigorous oversight related to Trump's conversations with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, Trump's family separation policy, which resulted in jailing babies, security clearances for Trump's family over the objections of the intelligence community, and many more, and more issues. And they keep coming. They don't stop. In response, the White House is refusing to turn over documents and engaging in delay tactics to stymie the ability of Congress to do their job. Well, it's in Putin's playbook. All you have to do is look to see how Putin did it with their monstrosity of a constitution. Give me a break. The stonewalling comes even as Trump initially promised to cooperate with congressional investigations. After House Judiciary Chair Jerry Nadler sent 81 letters seeking documents and information, Trump seemed nonplussed, saying, "I cooperate all the time with everybody." Now, I know that people may presume, and rightfully so, that, the presumption, it doesn't have to necessarily be the truth, that I might be a little obsessed with the Russian connection. That maybe I might be a little brainwashed by it. I wouldn't say brainwashed. I am a realist. And I understand that people could say, but look, this is an old Republican tactic. And I go, yeah, pretty old. And you notice the ones who first started using it were the old so-called Soviet fighters who took on the old Soviet 70-year model. And it seems to be working pretty good for them. They've been chipping away at the New Deal ever since. When Republicans controlled Congress, Trump ordered the intelligence community to declassify secret documents because Republicans in Congress wanted to see them. When it suits him, Trump will bend the rules to share information with Congress. Well, of course, those ones who kiss the ring of the king get, a small discount for your membership fees at Mar-a-Lago.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
David Shepardson of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Democrats in Congress unveiled a bill yesterday, Wednesday, to reinstate net neutrality rules repealed by the FCC under Donald Trump, the latest salvo in a more than decade-long battle over how to regulate Internet traffic. The bill mirrors an effort last year to reverse the FCC's December 2017 order, repealing landmark rules approved in 2015 that barred Internet providers from blocking or slowing content or offering paid fast lanes. Don't throttle me, bro. It is a fight that we can win, Senator Ed Markey, a bill sponsor at a Capitol Hill news conference, said. We are on the right side of history, and we will not give up. He said the bill, dubbed the Save the Internet Act, will protect consumers from higher prices, blocked websites, and slower Internet speeds. The reversal of net neutrality rules was a win for Internet providers like Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon, but opposed by content and social media companies like Facebook, Amazon, and Alphabet Inc. The bill would repeal the order introduced by FCC Chairman Ajit Pai and bar the FCC from reinstating it or substantially similar orders and reinstate the 2015 net neutrality order. House Republicans Greg Walden, Bob Latta, and Kathy McMorris Rogers said in a statement that both parties believe a free and open internet is fundamental to our society. All sides want a permanent solution, the Democrats and the Republicans said. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. That's pretty good news, a bipartisan agreement there. And, hey, Netroots Radio is going to be broadcasting on. We'll meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, and don't we need it? So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.